Welcome back. If you didn't already know, life is just another task analysis. So we finally made it to chapter 4 and we're gonna start talking about measuring behavior. So grab your favorite drink, get cozy, and let's get started. We're starting off on page 73 and Cooper gives us 2 full pages simply about the importance of measurement when it comes to behavior. So again, I will say this until I'm blue in the face. ABA is a science. And what do we use in science to determine if our hypothesis is true or not true? Measurement, right? The only way we can determine if our interventions as behavior analysts are working is to simply implement the intervention, take measurement of what the behavior looked like before the intervention, what it looks like during intervention, and after intervention, so that then somebody else can replicate the exact same intervention and obtain similar, if not exact, results, because this is how we become evidence-based, right? So Cooper goes on to talk about how there are some therapies and cures out there for behavior that have, as we would say in this day and age, good vibes, right? But there is nothing that actually supports or backs up these cures and potential therapies. Yes, they look nice. Yes, it's cute. It has a nice aesthetic or aesthetic. I prefer aesthetic, but to each their own. So they look nice. They look fun. They look like clients would prefer them, and therefore are appealing not only to parents and to clients and to direct care staff, maybe BCBAs, if they're like, oh yeah, we could do that. We could use that as a reinforcer, right? But at the end of the day, as a BCBA, you have to prioritize and implement evidence-based ABA strategies and procedures in your treatment plan. Because if not, what are we doing? Wasting time, resources, and fraudulently billing. We can't bill for ABA if we're not implementing ABA. So, full 2 pages of why measurement is important, how we need to make sure we are tracking the measurement of any intervention and behavior that we are completing. So we're on page 76. And Cooper's discussing the measurable dimensions of behavior, and he boils it down to 3. So the first one is repeatability or countability. In other words, how many times is this behavior occurring over time? Okay. And then we have temporal extent, which means how long is the behavior taking place for? So duration. And then temporal locus. When is it happening, right? So I'm talking about the 3-term contingency. Before or after what in the environment, what event, what instruction, what removal, right, of stimuli, when is that happening? When does the behavior take place? Now, when it comes to repeatability, there's different measures that we can use. Of course, the first one is count itself or frequency. And so we're talking about the number of times that a behavior occurred, but not with respect to time. Now, when we apply time and count, and we take both of these 2 dimensions into consideration, then we are talking about rate. And so rate is very common, but it's not always used correctly or efficiently. So when it comes to rate, it can be rate per minute, rate per hour, rate per day, rate per week, rate per month. So in order to compare two measurements based on rate, you would need to ensure they're both across the same time first. So the rate of response when we're counting time is either total observation, so the number of times, frequency that the SIB occurred during the total time would give the rate, or the interresponse time. So the interresponse time would not be the counting of every time the SIB occurred. It would be the time in between each occurrence of the SIB. So SIB ends, 2 minutes later, SIB starts, those 2 minutes would be the interresponse time. And now, when it comes to rate of skill development, it is very important to not only know the rate of correct responses, but the rate of incorrect responses to determine the fluency of the learner. So we want to see an increase in the rate of correct responding, as well as a decrease in the rate of incorrect responding, which is why we need more than one trial. How can we determine the fluency of this skill development with just one trial? You can't, right? Now, what about behaviors that are comprised of multiple components? So anything that takes more than one operation to complete. In other words, your task analysis, right? So if we're talking about trying to get the rate of a behavior that is completed through more than one operation, then you can take the rate from the number of operations that were done correctly versus incorrectly over the number of times that the sequence, the series, or the task analysis was completed. So you would have to take that into consideration when you are talking about behaviors that are not one single start and finish and are easy to track. Okay. Rate is also a good method of measurement for any free operant behavior. So when you're trying to determine if a behavior is a free operant, essentially what you're looking for is if it can be done at any given point in time without the need for instructional control through the discriminative stimulus, okay? So for example, if I'm scratching, if I'm singing, if I am spinning my ring, right? There's nothing that requires for me to be able to respond to a discriminative stimulus like you would at a red light. Where's the red light? What are you going to do? Slam on your brakes, right? So free operant behaviors are great for rate when it comes to behavior. So we would not use rate for any behavior that would occur during a discrete trial. And Cooper identifies a discrete trial behavior as receptive identification and introverbal in the form of the teacher prompting the student to respond to a question, as well as labeling flashcards in the classroom. So you wouldn't just randomly label an item without the teacher asking, like, what is it, right? You're not just going to sit there and be like, pig, horse, cow, dog. Just random. So we want to make sure that we're keeping this in mind when we are creating our data collection methods, and that we're not going against anything that Cooper has stated or recommended, right, for best practice. Another behavior that Cooper doesn't recommend that we use rate as a form of measurement for is any behavior that occurs for long extended periods of time and is continuous. So anything like staying on track when you are writing an essay in school, or participating in Monopoly, right? Like that takes a really long time. So anything that requires for the individual to be constantly engaged in the behavior. And for that, Cooper recommends interval recording or duration as a method of measurement. Now, how do we measure rates of responding over time? Through celeration. Celeration is the rate of responding of a behavior over a unit of time. There is acceleration when you are increasing, the rate of responding has increased over time. And then there's deceleration where the rate of responding has decreased over time. So this is where you would pull out those cumulative graphs for your 6-month progress report to determine what the rate of responding has been through time. And of course, we have a fancy chart to display the rates of celeration. It's called the standard celeration chart, which Cooper will discuss in further detail in chapter 6. For now, he just wants you to know that there are 4 units of measurement, so day, week, month, and year. So go ahead and stop here before we move on to measures based on temporal extent. I hope this was helpful. See you all later.